Hi, I'm Jenna.
And I'm Steve. Welcome to All Things Mad Men, from Chip and Dip to Zooby Zoo.
There's so much to love about this amazing show, and we're happy to connect to fans like us who discover new things with each rewatch.
Be advised, while we aren't gratuitous with spoilers, they can pop up as we discuss character arcs through the final season. Let's get started with Mad Men C to Z.
This is Mad Men Season 4, Episode 13, Tomorrowland. This episode was written by Jonathan Igla and Matthew Weiner and directed by Matt Weiner. As the episode opens, we see Faye and Dawn are both planning trips. Faye is traveling for business, and Dawn is taking the kids to California.
Faye feels comfortable enough to say to Dawn he needs to confront these ghosts that are haunting his life so he can move forward. In effect, she's telling him to grow up, move past his own past.
Faye isn't nagging, though, as she says this. She's really supportive. I think she's right to advise him to face his past, saying that that's going to help him with everything else. Don is afraid of being alone, and he's afraid of trusting anybody, and that keeps him trapped. And I think that's why Faye is such a good partner here, because, of course, this is at the heart of Don's health and well-being. If he does this work, he will get better. She names it, she leaves it to him to decide, and she promises her support. It's a very good push in the right direction. And I think it terrifies him.
Yeah, and I think her advice is really sound. She says, if you resolve it, then you'll be more comfortable, and then you'll just be a person like the rest of us. And I think that's sound advice based on what we know about Dawn. If Dawn has run from this for so long and it has been pulled out of his past, against his wishes, does he want to reset to the way it was before, where everything's all bottled up and hidden? Is he willing to embrace the opportunity presented by, these ghosts or skeletons from his past being brought forward? I guess I'm rooting for him to take the latter course, but I have to wonder how difficult that is, just given the habits he's acquired, even in the face of recent failures and challenges.
I think there's some fear of trying something new, but I also think some part of Don is attached to feeling special and unique. He's not like everyone else, so I think he has a little revulsion at the idea he could be ordinary. So when Faye says, "Oh, you're going to be like the rest of us," as soon as you put your deep, dark secret behind you, and I think there's a part of Don that likes knowing that he has secrets and not everybody is playing with the same kind of information that he has. That's part of his charm, and if he does, of course, reveal everything, that's scary because what if it's not enough? Putting that aside, to me, Don and Faye seem to be very happy here. He says he will miss her, and there isn't any trace of tension between them. There are issues about SCDP and how Don is going to choose to handle his past, but between Don and Faye, everything seems good.
I agree, given there's a lot of pressure on the firm. I feel that Faye is, a supportive partner. She's all in. She knows his dark secret, and she's still all in and committed. Here she is giving, I think, sound advice in the best interests of Dawn. She seems like a great fit for him.
In the next scene, we see Joan delivering mail to Lane. She's pushing a mail cart, which is not really, hasn't been her job in the past. We can see they've really cut back on staff. And Lane tells Joan that she's getting a promotion. It's a title, no more money for now. She will be the director of agency operations. And she says it's almost an honor, and then she pushes the mail cart away to the next person. Poor Joan.
Yeah, and Lane realizes this is, a very hollow promotion and title. So the whole interaction, I think, is really charming between the two of them. They're both smart enough to know what's going on and the peril the firm is in. Yet it is a kind gesture by Lane. They let slide in this scene that they have had no new business in 10 weeks. So this whole effort to drum up new business has hit a dry patch.
I really love that this show reveals how so many people suffer indignities at work, no matter how much power they have. I think it's very easy to imagine that if you have an impressive enough title, that everybody always shows you respect. But whether it's Vivian Winters judging Dawn about the train, or Joan having to deliver mail, or Roger begging Lee to delay the news, everybody endures some kind of indignity, and how they handle it is a big part of who they become.
I think the writing also does a great job of just showing the difference between, what's official and then the practical realities of whatever that means. And I think that's also a theme that's very common in most of our lives. Especially if you're not privy to this type of operation, you could sort of fall for the titles. We see it through the eyes of intelligent, well-informed characters who call it for what it is. I enjoy that a lot.
Next, we see Don meeting with the American Cancer Society. And when they ask why he wrote the letter, he says, "In my heart, it was an impulse because I knew what I needed to do to move forward." Not that that has any implications for any other plot points in this episode at all.
It's also interesting because it's not technically a lie, but it's not the whole truth either. From a moral, ethical standpoint, nothing changed from before or after Lucky Strike was with them. But there are all these reasons why Don wants to take this radical step in order to change the conversation and try and move the firm forward. In a world where they can't readily seek a new cigarette advertising revenue anyway.
Don goes on to propose a strategy showing how smoking interrupts family time, baking cookies, playing catch. He says that teenagers aren't thinking about their parents but themselves. And there's a truth call out when Don says, "The truth is, teenagers are mourning for their childhood more than they're anticipating their future." And if this is about Don, and it always, always is, he seems to be saying he really is still stuck dealing with his past and not ready to truly move forward to something new.
I find it interesting as well because in some ways Don has represented the older generation and their struggle with grasping this new generation and the power and influence they have. Here, I think we see the adaptability of Don in that he's now looking to harness that and use that as the engine for this ad campaign for the American Cancer Society. But it's interesting to me that the guy who was dismissing the young as having nothing to say and knowing nothing is now climbing into their heads and trying to leverage that mentality and that energy. It's rather striking to contrast that professional strength with the personal prison he lives in.
The woman in the scene who's speaking for the American Cancer Society is based on real life Mary Lasker, a philanthropist for healthcare, who once told the US Congress, "If you think research is expensive, try disease." This actress is Barbara Brownell, who has had guest appearances on MASH, Night Court, and Grey's Anatomy.
One of the cynical things that is discussed in the meeting is they talk about, adults aren't going to change. They don't change brands. They won't stop smoking. So this is one of the reasons you have to go after the kids. It's such a cynical, hard-boiled view of people. So in case anybody's worried Dawn is getting a bit idealistic or falling for the youth energy, it doesn't seem to be.
Dawn and Pete return from that meeting, and back at the office, Roger wants in, but Pete obviously has a different plan. So they're talking about their strategy, and an interesting connection pops up with Ken Cosgrove.
Ken's father-in-law works at Corning, so Dawn and Pete are very interested in what they could do to leverage that connection to pull more business. Ken pushes back and draws a line of division between his personal life and his role as an account man.
I think this scene right here is why people remember Ken Cosgrove as being a better guy than most of the office crowd. In spite of his name calling through the first 4 seasons and that awful chasing Allison around in the office to see what color her underwear was in Nixon versus Kennedy, he's had some really ugly moments. And at the same time, I think because of Ken's openness to Peggy and because of this right here, Ken isn't going to work his father-in-law as a business connection the way Pete and Roger would. He won't use his fiancée the way that Dawn would. He draws a line between the personal and the professional, and I think the audience respects him for it even if Pete and Roger don't.
We've seen the consequences of trying to leverage personal connections in the business, particularly with respect to Pete Campbell, but we've also got the recent example where Dawn asks Faye to provide him leads on some of her clients. My initial reflex and reaction to this is, what are you smoking, Ken? You need to get on this because their survival is at stake and they need all the business they can. So I find myself siding with the others in terms of Ken's resistance here. When I step back and think about it a bit more, and I think start to appreciate good reasons for Ken to make this division, what's interesting in the scene to me is as much as there's outnumbering him in the moment, Ken holds a pretty strong line, and they say, well, maybe Roger can go approach the father-in-law or whatever and drop his name. And Ken surrenders any attempt to control or influence them from doing whatever they want, but he sticks to his guns that he won't be the one who's doing it.
And Ken isn't without professional pride. He and Pete have had some competition in the past. He ignores Pete's dig that Pete's father-in-law is currently their biggest client unless they sign Dow. But Ken isn't having that competition. And he points out he's going to go work on the 30% of the firm that are his clients, so he's not insignificant or lazy. He's just prioritizing his family. He says, Cynthia's my life, my actual life. Ken's Kodak photos and his nostalgia speech would be real, unlike Don, who just had the trappings of a picture-perfect family when he gave that speech.
It's interesting, too. They're not happy with Ken's answer, but they don't do much to push him off of it, and they don't issue any threats. Ken's drawn a line in the sand that he won't cross, and we know the wreckage that is Don's personal life and Roger's.
In the next scene, Glenn stops by the Francis household, and Carla hesitates to send him up to say goodbye to Sally while Betty's gone. Ultimately, he does go up. We learn Sally's family is moving to Rye, which is nestled just next to that little southwestern foot on the state of Connecticut. And it is, as Bobby pointed out last episode, home to Playland Park, which opened in 1928. There's not very much to Sally and Glenn's conversation here, but they do seem to have the intention that they will see each other again. Glenn says he'll visit when he learns how to drive, and Sally says she can send him postcards.
And I find it touching that as minor as this move is, if we think about adults and somebody moves from one suburb of New York City to another. But for kids, this creates a real gap and a distance that's difficult for them to surmount. You can see it from the kids' perspective that this is a major move, and she might as well be in Europe or the other side of the moon. They're just friends, and they've experienced the challenges of divorce. And I think that allows them to relate to each other.
They say goodbye, and as Glenn is walking out, he runs into Betty coming in. Carla immediately apologizes, but Betty blows up, predictably. What kind of threat do you think Glenn is to Betty? Do you think it's just that she doesn't want Glenn showing attention to Sally instead of her? Or do you think his could I have some of your hair thing is making her protective because she thinks that he's trouble for Sally?
I struggle to see a legitimate threat or issue here, but I also struggle with the idea that Glenn and Betty ever had any sort of connection. Is it just possessiveness or selfishness of Betty that she doesn't want Sally potentially knowing him better than her or, eclipsing whatever connection she had at a moment in time? So it's a jealous defensive reaction. I mean, I don't know. I struggle a little bit with it.
What Betty says is, you could be friends with anyone, but I'm not sure if that's leave my daughter out of your trouble or if that's don't make me watch you pay attention to somebody else after you thought I was beautiful. So it is a bit nebulous for me.
Yeah, and then that the latter premise there is predicated upon, this sense of possessiveness by Betty that she's jealous or somehow views Glenn as this emotional ex, which again, I just have difficulty getting there. If I strip that away and just say, okay, she doesn't want her daughter to have anything to do with Glenn, we're left with a pretty big sin on the part of Carla here. But I don't think Carla has been read into Betty's hostility towards Glenn. So I get how in Betty's mind, Carla has really crossed a line here again on a rule that, Betty wants enforced. But in defense of Carla, she's not aware of all this emotional baggage that's wrapped up in the rule. And the idea that, a kid will come over and say goodbye while she's there in the house and then leave in short order. If I'm Carla, I'm struggling to understand why Betty is so upset with me in this moment.
Well, this is one of Betty's top 5 least likable scenes for sure when she fires Carla for this. There's no notice, and there was no harm done. It's cruel. Betty feels undermined, and I feel like that is all about power, and her feelings are obviously hurt, but it's a huge overreaction, and she knows it. And going back to her feelings about this, I don't think Betty has romantic feelings for Glenn. I know there's a discussion around Glenn as a stand-in for who she wants Dawn to be in that whole situation, which I'm not completely sure I buy. If we say Betty is a narcissist and she has to be the prettiest in the room all the time, but in terms of I'm the most beautiful, give me attention, maybe it makes sense that nobody else, even her daughter, is allowed to be given that kind of attention, even if she doesn't want it from a particular individual.
I like your line of thinking there, and to me, that kind of makes sense. It's less about Glenn, more about control, about whatever Betty feels she's lacking in her life, and not wanting to have somebody else eclipse that or move past it. Imagine a future where Sally is young and beautiful and Betty is aging out. She would be the kind of person I think would be upset about that and always seeking to get the attention and the shine that she's lost and feeling, jealous and bitter that, her daughter now possesses it. It is an awful moment for Betty in terms of the overreaction. And I know I personally feel a lot of hostility towards her character for this. And I think part of it goes back to just the unfairness of it. When Betty was being treated unfairly, it bothered me and I felt bad for her. But when somebody's being treated unfairly, the solution isn't, hey, I hope one day, Betty, you get to treat someone unfairly and leverage your power and control and authority in an abusive manner. That'll even out the score here. She's paying forward the cruelty and bad treatment that she has suffered herself. Carla doesn't deserve it at all here, and I think Carla has proven over a long time of service and devotion to those kids just, what her qualities are. I just feel terrible about Betty's treatment of Carla.
I love Carla snapping back when Betty says, "Are your kids all doctors and lawyers?" And she says, "You best stop talking now." And she knows Betty will fold if pressed, but Carla does not have the agency she needs in this situation. Betty doesn't even let her go say goodbye to the children. It's as bad as it could be. We talked about this in the last episode, but to reiterate, Betty, in making this decision, is probably making her own life worse here in terms of paying misery forward, because if she had not fired Carla here, the ending of this episode would probably have been very different.
Yeah, it ends up having a very crucial role in the plot and the developments. And she's not thinking through the implications for anyone else, even for herself. Because I agree with you. I think this is going to make her life harder. It's just a lousy decision from top to bottom. And yeah, there's just no defending it.
Next, we see Don meeting with his accountant again. We learn he sold Anna's house in San Pedro. We're reminded he's the one selling the house in Ossining. And the accountant nudges him forward a little bit too, just like Faye. He says, well, maybe you'll be getting a place of your own. He says, don't you want to go home and see a steak on the table? In season 1, Pete was a newlywed, and he was talking about how excited he was that there was going to be dinner waiting for him when he got home. And then later he threw his dinner off the balcony, but there was a time he appreciated it. And of course, that's a symbol of where Don could be headed. Is he going to stay in the dark apartment, or is he going to try to invest in a permanent relationship? Could it ever be different?
And at this mention from Frank, we don't get any sense that has appeal for Don. I mean, he doesn't engage with the idea. He had that, and it's gone now. And I don't get a sense that he's in any hurry to get it back.
In the middle of this meeting, Betty calls to tell Don she let Carla go. And when Don is frustrated, Betty needles him. She says, oh, then don't take them. They're used to it. And Don, who has his own narcissistic tendencies for sure, I mean, this is the perfect way to ensure Don will keep the trip as planned. He just barks, we're going. So this is a really difficult thing for him, because how is a parent going to be with his 3 children by himself. I think this thing with Sally where she wanted to live with him really stuck with him. He doesn't want to let the kids down and cancel the trip. So I'm proud of him for not canceling, even if he doesn't show as well as he could.
Yeah, he does have his moments where he seems to be stepping up in thinking of the kids in a world where there's so many other occasions where it feels like he isn't stepping up for various people, including the kids. In this moment, I agree. I think there's a certain element here of reverse psychology where Betty's comment leads him to commit to the trip. He is in a bit of a pickle.
Next, we see Peggy's friend Joyce bringing Carolyn, somebody new, in to see Peggy. She's wondering if Peggy can find her some modeling work, and Peggy is more intrigued by the fact that Topaz fired everybody on the photo shoot Carolyn was working for. Harry pops in. He's only interested in the business of sleaze, so once Carolyn is gone, he doesn't even stick around for any work conversation. But while Carolyn is in the room, he's definitely interested in her. I feel like they really adjusted Harry's character a lot. He had some earlier morally gray but very interesting scenes, like when he opened Ken's paycheck, or the cave painting story, or his guilt about sleeping with Hildy. And now he just seems like a sleazy LA guy. I feel like he must bring some kind of value, but we never really get to see that.
He does seem to be very much a follower and somebody who's heavily influenced by the environment and the people he's surrounded with. So in like you mentioned, in this case where he's spending a lot of time in Hollywood, in California, it just seems Harry soaks that up and epitomizes whatever the standard is.
So then we see Megan talking with Don about making childcare arrangements for his trip. She mentions Disneyland and a Dodgers game. This would likely have been the World Series game against the Minnesota Twins. Games 3, 4, and 5 were played in LA on October 9th, 10th, and 11th. And the Dodgers won after 7 games. Disneyland opened in California in July of 1955, 16 years before Disney World in Florida in October of 1971. So we have a pretty busy, exciting trip planned to see World Series Dodgers game and Disneyland, and that's a lot in just a few days. And I get the sense that Don's invitation to Megan to come along on the trip does seem to be like the spur of the moment. He's offering to pay her. I don't get the sense that either of them is plotting anything sinister here.
I have the same impression as you here. It seems to be all business. Megan is working away trying to find childcare coverage for Don while he's out west. He's just solving a problem he has in terms of a business trip that's being combined with his kids. The one thing I'll just mention about, the construction of Disney World, that was in direct response to this exact problem. Being located out in California, Disneyland was a long trip and a major commitment for much of the population, especially that on the eastern seaboard. And that was the genesis of the Disney World. It went on now to actually be bigger and have more attractions there than they have out on the West Coast.
Ken and Peggy have this nice scene together next where they got a meeting for some new business. Peggy made it happen with Topaz after she found out Joyce's friend got fired along with everybody else. And we know SCDP has been trying to get a client since Lucky Strike left, so this is a pretty big deal.
And we know, when Peggy was coming up, all the difficulties she had in terms of getting respect. We see here again, it seems that Ken has always had a professional respect for her. And this interaction here seems to be very professional, but also warm. He appreciates what she brings to the table, and he's happy to partner with her.
In California, Don comes back to the hotel room where Megan, Sally, and Bobby quietly sing a French song called There Was a Little Ship. And they're very cheery and very proud to sing for Don, but it turns out it's a pretty dark song. We'll put a link to Il était un petit navire on the episode page of our website, madmenctz.com.
I think this is the genesis of what happens later in the episode. Don has solved a very practical problem, which is childcare. In this moment, he sees Megan with the kids and sees that she has a ability to interact with them that in many ways seems superior to what we've seen out of Betty Draper. And we know Faye failed, the interaction with Sally when she was in the office. And here's suddenly Megan at the opposite end of the spectrum, killing it as the caretaker for the kids. And we can see that they have affection, they're having fun, and she's looking after the practical bit. I gotta figure there are elements in Don Draper's brain at this moment, which are starting to think, man, she solves a lot of needs in my life.
Don compares Megan to Maria von Trapp, and he looks really impressed by how happy the kids are. But I think he's also mostly just looking at Megan here. I hesitate to buy too much into this theory that Megan's good with the kids, so that's what makes him fall for her. I think there are other elements that have to do with Don's fear of being a fully integrated, healthy adult that make it easier for him to choose Megan. But clearly, this moment is very charming and made for TV. And she planned it, right? Like the second that he walks in the door, here they are doing this performance for him.
Yeah, and I mean, Megan looks very cute. We know that these two have hooked up in the office, so we know Dawn finds her attractive. I don't think being able to provide childcare is the, primary or only reason, but I think it's a not unhelpful box to tick in the attraction of Don Draper that seems to be taking place here.
When Megan goes to her own room, there's this moment where you can see how John Hamm, the actor, is better with kids than Don Draper probably really is. So he flops on the bed and the kids start giggling. And his willingness to be silly with his kids for a second is so refreshing because this is reminding us how Don is always taking himself too seriously.
Yeah, it really seems to be the only glimpses we get of him sort of letting down the guard and not taking himself seriously. And I always find it kind of refreshing to see that moment and that connection. And you can see how hungry the kids are for it because you don't get the sense that they have those moments with Betty, their mother.
And I think if you accept the theory that Don is more at peace in California, that's part of it too, right? This idea that this place draws out something good in him, something real, something a little less tense. But whether you could keep that up in California, I don't believe it. I think, he would revert to the same things whether he's on the East or the West Coast. Speaking of California and all the ways Don has known to relax here, the next day Don takes Sally and Bobby to visit Stephanie at what used to be Anna's house. And to me, this is really sad because Anna would have loved to have met them. So I wish he had gotten to this place a little bit sooner, that he could have brought them here, but here we are. They mentioned they'll be going to Marineland after this stop. That was a park that opened in 1954. It was purchased by SeaWorld in the 80s, and they closed it almost immediately. But at the time Sally and Bobby would have visited Marineland, there would have been performing orcas and pilot whales and sea lions there.
We get another one of Dawn's half lies or half truths in this scene when Sally notices the Dick and Anna 64 written on the wall and asks who Dick is. And Dawn says that it is him and that it's his nickname sometimes, which we know is not really the whole truth there, but it's not that far off in many ways. It's interesting that we feel like he's starting to open the door a crack and to let at least Sally have a peek into the idea that there's more to him in his life, even if obviously she's young and now's probably not the time to share that.
And Stephanie smiles when she hears him say that, like she's proud of him. Let's also note this is Don doing what Faye recommended. He's looking backward, he's facing the truth, he's integrating his past self, his name, with his future, his kids. It seems like a small step, and it's probably later than it should have been, but it does feel like he's going the right direction here, at least a little bit.
It's kind of a sad moment when we see that all that remains of Anna's life are 4 boxes and then the piano. And Stephanie gives Dawn Anna's engagement ring and tells him that she wanted him to have it.
They give a reason. She says, I don't believe in it. And it still seems weird. Anna wouldn't have given this ring to Stephanie instead. I'm not sure I totally buy this, but I get that Anna was worried about Don being alone, just like his accountant asking if he wanted to come home to a steak on the table someday. So this is Anna inviting Don to connect with people. And he once said to Anna, this whole life is because of you. I'm not going to blame his next life chapter solely on Anna. But I bet if she had met Faye, they wouldn't probably be best friends, but I think she would understand why Faye is good for Dawn. So I don't think this is what Anna had in mind, but so be it. Dawn gets the engagement ring.
It's good to have an engagement ring in your pocket. You never know when you're going to bump into somebody.
Because that's how that works. Once again, I think Stephanie gets lines a little older than her youthful character would realistically say. She says she doesn't know what she's going to do next. She's got the rest of her life ahead of her. And she reminds Dawn, so do you. You can see Dawn missing and loving Anna as he stares at that wall, at those words they painted together. And it's just the right touch. He's not drinking or incapacitated, but since he hides so much of himself and he doesn't talk to anybody about this, it's a reminder that this is still hurting and we see how much he cares.
Poolside, Sally and Bobby are swimming. Megan's in the water caring for Jean. And we have Don brooding alone in his hotel room. Why do you think he's alone in the hotel room instead of swimming with his kids at this point?
It's interesting because Megan, Bobby, and Sally each make an individual pitch to John to join them, and he chooses instead to go back. I feel like his life is going by while he's sitting there missing Anna. And I'm happy he's smart enough to get out of there and eventually join them. And I'm really glad this is a happy trip for the Draper kids because I feel like they have had way more than their share of tense family dinners. So when Dawn cannonballs into the pool, it's like, oh, finally, you're having an actual happy family time right now.
And it does feel like it's almost a visual presentation of his choices, right? The brooding secrets and taking yourself seriously option, or the live your life, engage with the people who love you, and let loose, enjoy the moment. So there's a duality, I think, in this scene. And then when he comes out and jumps in the pool, where we see both sides of the coin, I don't think there's any resolution of which side dominates, but just that both are present. And it's something that Don's grappling with.
Later that evening, they're planning for Disneyland the following day in the hotel room. And Sally has an important line. She says, when they're talking about the rides and Jean is too small, Dawn suggests that Jean wait with Megan. And Sally says, then Megan can't go. So we know she cares that Megan is part of the experience and she wants her there. And that seems significant. Bobby's line is, I don't want to ride an elephant, I want to fly a jet. And that's another pull toward the future for our Don Draper character who's often stuck between his past and his need to run towards something new. I also thought this is kind of maybe optimistic for Bobby going to Tomorrowland because his robot got smashed against the wall during a family dinner. So Tomorrowland could be a little bit triggering for him, but he's bravely facing it. Megan and her friend Camille are going out to the Whiskey A Go-Go, which opened in 1964. They're both very dressed up, and Megan clearly wants to show Dawn off to her friend, but also maybe a little to show him how dressed up she is. Camille is played by a Quebecois actress named Kim Poirier. She's also been in Dawn of the Dead and Paradise Falls.
It's interesting as they head out to the club and we get a sense of, young people living the hip life. And we have Don Draper, the family man, back in the hotel room with his kids. I feel a real generational gap there between the two choices. Family man Don is older. Megan and her friend are going out to enjoy the city.
I think we're all like, okay, well, they got together before. Is this going to happen again? But so far, it seems like, okay, this is just working out very well professionally. They get along well, but there hasn't been anything romantic between them so far.
Back on the East Coast, we've got Betty coming home to an angry Henry. He immediately rolls into challenging her on why she fired Carla. Betty refused to give Carla a letter of recommendation. And Henry rolls into condemning her for taking away the stability the kids had, with this nanny who's been there since they were born. So here's Henry advocating heavily for the well-being of the kids, as well as, I think, for fair treatment of Carla.
I think in previous rewatches, I was too angry at Betty for what she's doing to Carla to catch this. But I noticed this line from Henry He says there is no fresh start, lives carry on. And that is diametrically opposed to Don's "this never happened" philosophy. Because Henry is saying you can't start over, you carry yourself and your past with you. Henry does that anyway. He's facing things and Betty is trying to hide them instead. So when she pretends like, oh, I fired Carla because I wanted a fresh start with a new house and new help and everything, I appreciate Henry doesn't let her off the hook with this. He's not buying it. So in a way, he and Faye are very similar because not that Faye pushes Dawn this hard, but he's naming the truth and he's pushing her to be a better person here.
It's also intended as a critique of that fresh start myth or lie that, Dawn and Betty are trying to tell themselves. I think what Faye and Henry are saying is, look, we are a product of everything that's come before, and we can't just wish away the past. But we don't have to let it control us or imprison us or scar us or prevent us from getting better or moving on with our lives. But the lie is such a convenient, clean, escapist mentality, right? Where you just pretend you draw a line and pretend that it never happened. And that's really not the case, either for yourself, and we can see the scars that the past has left on Betty and Dawn, but also for those other people you've affected when you try and do that. And in the end, your own lie you're telling yourself to move on isn't serving that purpose really. It's just burying landmines, that you're going to step on in the future. I do think this is really an important contrast in philosophies and views of life between the two of them that's really highlighted here. And I think we can see Betty's frustration at having someone like Henry challenging her on that.
Henry knew something was wrong between Betty and Sally when he came home for dinner early and Betty announced they should move, and then Sally immediately left the table. So he didn't know the whole story. And here he says, I can't believe it's the neighbor boy. So that doesn't make sense to him, which, that's logical. Why? That does not make sense to us either. And then she says, I just wish once you could take my side. And he says, nobody's ever on your side, Betty. And it reminded me of Beaches. Sorry, throwback. When Cece's mother says, nobody could ever give you too much attention. And Betty is that way. She's so extreme. She's needing to be centered so much. And we understand she had to sacrifice a lot of herself in her relationship with Dawn. But here, I don't think Henry minds most of the time to indulge her. But with these injustices, just to satisfy her whims, I appreciate and respect that he calls her out. Betty married an actual adult the second time around. I think whether she appreciates him or not is something that remains to be seen.
Yeah, and just to go further on that adult who's a decent man, right? He has values, he has principles, and he's not going to bend or warp them for convenience or to win an argument. And I think this is a real contrast for Betty to encounter this principled, mature, serious person. It's too bad that Betty's feeling put upon here and attacked. In many ways, this is the right kind of partner for her. I think if she could do a better job maybe of reading him into some of the baggage and fears and situations to which she's responding, he would be more able to work with her on an appropriate path forward rather than coming in after the fact, with partial information and just appearing critical and hostile to what she's done.
Back in California, when Don hears Megan come back next door, he knocks on her door. The kids are asleep. Megan and Don go out onto the balcony. They talk a little. He's Don Draper.
I think when she and her friend walked in earlier, it got him thinking about her when she finally comes back. He's been thinking about her all evening and he wants to be with her.
I wanted to note in this brief conversation Don and Megan have on the balcony, and she says, I don't even want to be an actress. So that's interesting for later. I guess we could read it as she's pretending that because her friend was in 2 episodes of Hogan's Heroes, which I guess would have been a big deal. Maybe she's kind of trying to convince herself, like, it doesn't matter that my friend says my teeth make me not a good candidate to be an actress. I don't even want to be an actress. But when she says that the first time around, I believe her. So later on, when she does express interest, spoiler, in acting, I found that interesting because I remembered that about her character, that that was not important to her. So I guess this is just a little denial.
Megan seems very happy to get with Dawn in this instant too, so it makes me wonder what have her thoughts or feelings been over the course of this trip to this point. We know she's been very busy with the kids, but she doesn't appear shocked to see Don Draper at her door, nor does she seem to put much effort into shooing him out.
And of course, all of this is a very clear violation of Dawn's relationship with Faye, and they both know it. Back in New York, Betty goes into Sally's room and lies down on her bed. It feels like the same old routine for Betty, upset with her partner, feeling alone, feeling misunderstood. And it also seems like the same old routine for Dawn, knocking on somebody's door when he's already got somebody back home.
Maybe all the characters are resetting back to their starting points.
Later in California, Megan looks at Dawn and says, "I know who you are now." And it reads a little bit like she's saying, "I didn't understand you at first, but now we're so close and I get you." But I think she's trying to say, what's in the past is past. And in this moment, I know you, and that's enough. Like, I know who you are now. And Dawn is always up for leaving his past behind, in contrast to Faye, who wants him to do the work and face it. So these are two different messages, just like Betty had two very different messages with Henry and with Dawn.
I agree with that take 100%, and I especially agree with how appealing that message is to Dawn. Don't worry about your past. Box it up, draw a line, let's never speak of it again. All that matters is the present going forward. He's tried to live by that, maybe unsuccessfully in many ways, but there's been a lot of success, and I think he would look at his life to this point and, point to what he's achieved. It feels to me like Megan is serving that up on a platter in this moment in a way that I wonder if she can even fathom just how much appeal that has to Don, given what he's been through and where he's come from and what he's faced recently.
Yes, here's Megan in his bed saying, "I know you have a good heart and you're always trying to be better." They're talking about him. It's the best thing ever. And she's reassuring him that everything you're doing is okay, just like he described happiness in the pilot episode. Megan doesn't voice any needs of her own. She's not nudging him to tackle his demons. She's just looking at him like he is the best thing in the world. And they have plans to repeat it the next night. So there aren't any regrets. There's no worry about Faye. There's no worry about anything in the office. It is like California is some kind of placebo for making Don feel happy and lighter.
This does feel like quite a contrast too, if you recall when Jane was chasing Roger, and it felt that she was very manipulative and really had a master plan in mind with how she was going to, beguile him. If you listen to the commentary, Jonathan Igla and Matthew Weiner talk about how Megan is not trying to be manipulative here. This is not part of some master plan or scheme that she's contrived. She's being herself. Maybe she is a little young and inexperienced. And I buy that, as I listen to them talk and see this interaction. In the case of Don and his history, I can see how all this is very appealing to him. It's ironic because he was so critical of Roger chasing Jane and this falling in love. But now it feels like the shoe is on the other foot. And it feels to me like he is at a very vulnerable moment where he is completely susceptible to this type of chemistry and magic in the moment. And he is falling for it.
Back in New York, Peggy and Ken show up for the Topaz meeting. She's got some ideas. She pitches, the client seems happy but demanding. He makes her work for it by offering multiple ideas, even though they're on a deadline. And Peggy is up to it. It's nice seeing her be so successful. The client and Peggy actually have really good chemistry together. I wanted a little bit more of this positive work thing they've got going on here. Art Garten is played by John Manfrotati, and you might recognize him from Everybody Loves Raymond or Men of a Certain Age.
And there's some fun in this scene too, because we can really see how far Peggy's come. There's a moment where Ken kind of stumbles and botches things as the account man. And then Peggy puts on the creative shine. And pretty soon, Ken's little faux pas is forgotten, and the client is enthralled with all these ideas coming out of Peggy's mouth. We know it's something she aspires to professionally, and here she is delivering it, maybe not on the biggest account in the world, but at a crucial moment for the firm and at a time when they haven't had success.
Back in California, Don, Megan, and the kids are eating in a diner. Sally and Bobby start squabbling and milkshake spills. And we all understand that this milkshake moment is the moment Don decides he can be with Megan. She makes everything so easy. And there is so much trauma for Don, Sally, and Bobby because Betty was so unhappy. And they all know a spilled milkshake is a Category 5 hurricane. Until Megan just cleans up her dress and she smiles and grabs some napkins. They had no idea life could be like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like Megan has shown them an alternative way to live their lives where you don't have to overreact and poison the day. We don't know when or where. We just know something's going to spill, and there's no point in getting in a twist over it. And it's fun to see Dawn go from furious to then being completely disarmed by Megan's behavior. It's a little scene, but really a joy.
Oh, I think this is a defining scene in this episode. I think it really is the moment where Megan takes the power to reframe it, and it works beautifully. There's a truth call out when Bobby says, "Tell Sally snakes used to have legs," and Dawn says, "I don't know if that's true." And Sally accuses Bobby of having baby science, which sparks their fight. Matthew Weiner has 4 children, and this disagreement seems so real to me. It's a very specific topic, the need to display expertise. This shows Sally wasn't magically cured by her visit to a psychiatrist or a trip to California with her dad. She's a kid, she fights with her brother. She's a work in progress, just like her father, and we hope her mother.
Unlike all us well finished adults.
We're so well finished, yes. And I have a big spoiler here, so please skip ahead. It's very big. In the future, notice that Dawn and Megan start unraveling as soon as she decides she wants to take care of other things besides Dawn's life. While all her attention is on keeping him happy and his life trouble-free, very much like Joan did for Roger for so long, Dawn is really into her. But that's the requirement, right? Have no other interests other than me.
Don't rain on our parade. I think things are going to go swell.
In the next scene, Don and Megan are at his apartment back in New York, and there's so much light in the room. On previous watches, I thought it was the hotel room in California.
This seems like risky behavior given what we know about Dawn's apartment and who has a set of keys to Dawn's apartment.
Yes, good point. Megan wakes up, and Don says, "I feel like myself when I'm with you." Who is Don Draper? He's himself when he's with Megan, apparently, turns out. And he pulls out Anna's engagement ring, which he should need a license to carry. And he proposes to Megan. And I feel like Rachel on Friends when Chandler proposes to Monica. I'm peeking through my fingers like, oh, I can't not look at it. It's a terrible idea that this is happening. Nobody is like, oh, finally, Dawn has found happiness. It's, what are you thinking? You barely know her.
It's an incredibly impulsive thing to do by Don Draper. And he gives us some clues about where it's coming from. You know, he alludes to fate and all the things that needed to happen to put them in this place for something like this to occur, this sort of magical thinking. It's so different than the calculating Don Draper we've seen in so many situations to this point. I mean, the closest, I guess, we've seen to impulsive Don Draper has only been in the negative when he's been so frightened and afraid that he's going to bolt with Rachel or, certain behaviors like that. So seeing impulsive, happy Don Draper is really a new creature.
It also seems like he's very much connecting Megan to Anna, not just with the ring. So I do want to point out that when Megan asks, how long have you been thinking about this because he has the ring in his pocket, he starts to lie. He says, it's been in my family, and then he changes it. So I like that. He says, "Not my family, really. It belonged to somebody very important to me." So at least Don learned that part from his mistake with Betty. He's trying to start with honesty. And Megan seems very thrilled about this, but everything Don is saying is about him. How you make me feel. Did you ever think about the number of things that had to happen for me to get to know you? It's not about her. But this thinking seems like a very Anna philosophy that Don used to find really sketchy. There's nothing about Megan's journey. There's nothing about what he wants for her, about their future together, what he sees in her, because he doesn't know her at all. So I think it's interesting he's idealizing her, but there's this a bit of Anna in California and this fancy. To your point, we don't usually see Don giving in to that sort of feeling.
And we know professionally right now, he does feel like he's somewhat out of control. They can't bring in new business. They've had to lay off all their staff. That side of things is a complete mess. We know his personal self improvement effort, where he's laying off the alcohol, has gone by the wayside. And I do think this impulsive grab at some sort of romantic fantasy about how simple and wonderful things could be with Megan is exactly that. And he really should be paying more attention to planning Don Draper rather than just getting swept away on the Roger Sterling romantic express here.
Back at the office, Don makes an announcement to the partners and Joan. And when he says, "Miss Calvé and I are getting married," Roger doesn't know who he's talking about, which is amazing.
Roger has so many great quips. Megan, go get some ice so they can celebrate.
And I think the partners are surprised by the news, but they're also staring at Don because they don't know what to do with a Don who is positive and happy. He's like a completely different species to them. There is a lot of skepticism in the room, I think, too. He might as well have jumped on a couch. This is just a whole new being.
Yeah, and I mean, we've gone through this with Roger, and everybody was skeptical. And I think everybody has the same skepticism about Dawn. I love what Roger says to Dawn. Dawn, see, this is how you react to an announcement. It's happy, impulsive Dawn Draper. We have everybody else trying to hide their skepticism about this course of action. An executive's marrying his secretary. Oh, how innovative and fresh.
I think for romantic people, you want to see a love story and believe in it. But I don't think anybody can watch this and go, "Oh, this is exactly what Don Draper needs." Or critically, "This is what Megan Calvé really needs right now." And Don is still with Faye, even though his partner's already learned he's engaged to Megan. So as Pete would say, that's sloppy. Ken and Peggy are very happy that they signed Topaz and the work is due in a week. They go to Don to brag, and on their way in, Pete comes out saying, "Are you two getting married?" And that's when Peggy sees Megan and Don kissing through the door. And she and Ken both congratulate Don and Megan. And Don is not himself, because when Ken and Peggy tell him they signed Topaz, Don Draper says, "That's great news. Good work, both of you," which might be a first ever in positivity from him. He doesn't even ask about the ad concept. This is definitely body snatching time here.
Dawn pulls Peggy aside and tells her that Megan reminds him of Peggy, and then mentions that Megan admires her just as much as he does.
Okay, I think it's very messed up that he says that. I appreciate that Peggy does such a good job here. She says the right things. She clearly, like us, has doubts about this whole thing, but she's not going to rain on his parade. And she offers about Megan. She's very beautiful. And what else can she say? Because she's never even thought about Megan before. Megan has not been much of a personality in the office. She's not contributed ideas. Peggy doesn't think about her. And I don't think Don means it to be negative. But when he tells Peggy Megan reminds him of her, it's rude. He says, "She has the same spark and she admires you." And he means it to be flattering, but isn't he saying, "You're alike and I'm marrying that one over there"? And I don't think for a second Peggy wants to marry Don. I don't think she has romantic feelings for him, but she does like being special in his eyes. So for Don to say, "Oh, Megan's like you," and to have this work wife and actual wife now Peggy is going to feel replaced in terms of how important she is to Don, and I think that matters.
I don't think that's why he says it to her. I think he says it to her to prep her for getting Megan as a copywriter.
But we don't know that yet because we're not at that scene yet.
But I don't think there's any risk of Peggy being jilted emotionally about Dawn's move here, or if there is, I'm not perceiving it.
Peggy looks worried about Don as she gives him a hug, but she's kind. She says that I'm happy for both of you. And she knows better than Faye to try to push him to do the smart thing here.
Everybody knows this is a mistake, right? It's such a great mirror image of Roger with Jane, and it's so funny that this time the biggest critic, the coolest cucumber about Roger's move was Dawn, and the most vocal in the moment. And here it's come around 180 degrees.
I love, 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 love the next scene. Finally, Peggy goes to Joan's office for a little what the hell discussion together, which is so well deserved. And Joan opens with, whatever could be on your mind. It's perfect.
And here we could see Peggy with the mask off, right? She's no longer having to be polite or say the right things.
She goes, I just signed the first new business since Lucky Strike, but it's not as important as getting married. Again. It's great. And Joan points out she was promoted without a raise, and nobody poured champagne to celebrate her. And I love that they're both carrying these very valid feelings of being undervalued. They both get it about the other person, and they share it. It's so great, finally. And in the commentary, Matt Weiner talks about how everybody wanted this scene and that they were very happy. The actors were very happy to have this scene together. I wish Mad Men would let us have a little bit more of this because it's lovely to see them together, getting to vent, getting to see the masks slip a little bit.
And we've had so many occasions where we were hoping to see some bonding between the two of them when Joan says, my advice is not to get all your satisfaction from the job. And in the moment, Peggy just flips it right back and says, that's bullshit. And then they both have a hearty laugh. It's a delicious scene.
And of course, the key plot piece from this is Joan's prediction that Don will make Megan a copywriter because he won't want to be married to his secretary. Is that what he meant? She admires you? Peggy answers. So I thought Don was trying to make Peggy feel flattered about his personal choice, but here we understand he's flattering her already to pave the way for Megan's professional path. That doesn't change the fact that Peggy's relationship with Don will probably be different now that Megan's also here in the office and managing her department and her staff.
You can just see the wheels turning in Peggy's head as she realizes where this is headed and all the complications and hassles and pains that it's going to bring with it for her leading the department. And we know she struggled through, being promoted and not being seen for the level she was promoted into because people can't let go of it. We had the whole friction with Joey and her having to step up and fire him to assert her authority. And then now she's being undermined from a completely unexpected quarter. Whatever she thought was the motive for Dawn's earlier comments, we can just see the ick written all over her face as she realizes and where this is leading. And I think as a viewer, we can really commiserate with Peggy on the battles to come here.
Megan does nudge Don about one thing. Dr. Miller called again, and Megan says it's not going to get any easier. I think this scene where Don calls Faye is memorable among breakups across TV and film, and not just Don's numerous relationship breakups. We saw Faye break up with her ex, David, on the phone right before Don asked her out and they started their relationship. And now here they are on the phone, ending everything.
Kara really acts her butt off in this scene, and I think strikes a perfect balance between being a strong professional woman and, facing what is really kind of a nightmare scenario, and then trying to hold it together emotionally. I think showing the cost of this impulsive decision by Don Draper, made the partners and Peggy look at it and struggle to fathom, what he's thinking in doing this and know it's probably not a great idea. With Faye, we see the human cost. Faye was starting to really invest in this relationship, and I think was really committed to it in a serious way through no fault of her own, with no advanced warning. Suddenly, it's all snatched away in a moment, and it just can't help but be cruel, even as Don Draper is trying to soften the blow.
No matter how you feel about Faye for Dawn, everything about this scene is painful. Faye does not deserve this. She's right to be surprised and hurt and angry. All her feelings are really honest and earned. And she doesn't make it easier for Dawn in this conversation. And this is the contrast with Megan. Dawn should have chosen her. She's an equal partner. She would stand up to him. And I think it's his fear that makes him reject Faye, his fear of growing up, facing his past, and being accountable. And I think Megan makes him think life is easy and painless. But it's also true, Dawn does not seem as infatuated with Faye anymore, even though she never let him down. Faye is right when she says, I hope she knows you only like the beginnings of things. Faye told Dawn when they met, you'll be married again in a year. And it seems she was right. So her saying you only like the beginnings of things is probably not the best omen here.
It makes me think back to when Rachel is responding to Dawn's suggestion that they run away together, and she denounces him as a coward. She's referring to his unwillingness to face the difficult and challenging aspects of his past in a way while staying true, to his commitments and obligations in the present. And when I think about Dawn's choice for Megan here, I'm wondering if some of that cowardice is informing it. So I do believe he is infatuated with her and he's being impulsive and he's fallen for her. But I also think somewhere down deep inside, this decision is a convenient cop out. I think Megan allows him to dodge so many of those implications and default back to a model which is maybe unlikely to endure in the long run. But if you are a coward, maybe it's easier to grab onto that in the moment than to, take the more difficult path and know without a doubt that there's a tough road in front of you.
Next, we see Joan on the phone with Greg, who's at basic training. Joan is describing Dawn, saying, he's smiling like a fool, like he's the first man who ever married his secretary. And I love getting to hear Joan's opinion she would never fully unleash at work, even with Peggy. And we officially confirm now that Joan is pregnant. Greg is happy about it. As far as he knows, it's his baby. And I also notice Greg seems very happy where he is. He's got friends we see on camera. For him, it seems like the Army was a good choice, and he finally seems content and good with himself.
There also seems to be a lot of warmth between the two of them in this scene. When Joan is unloading to him and sharing these thoughts, it seems like she's genuinely happy to have someone she can confide in. It's a rather loving scene when so many of the prior ones we've seen between the two of them have had some friction or uncertainty, at the heart of them.
Maybe Greg is a little easier to love at a distance. Next, Betty is back in the house we've seen them in since the pilot. She powders her nose, she's got one box, and she's clearly waiting. When Dawn comes in, she pretends she didn't know the realtor was on the way. Dawn goes and finds a bottle of wine he stashed in a tall cabinet, and she pulls out a plastic cup and he pours. And they're so cordial together here, which we haven't seen for a while. So much so that Betty confesses things aren't perfect. She's been fighting with Henry lately. She doesn't say that explicitly, but it's implied. And I wonder what she's looking for here, because I don't think she wants to go back to Dawn. But just like with the mechanic on the road, I think Betty needs to prove to herself people can love her the best and the most. So she wants Dawn to still want her, even if she doesn't want him.
It does seem like she is very open emotionally with Dawn here in a way that she hasn't been, since she decided to terminate the marriage. In the context of what's going on in Dawn's life, it's interesting because to me, it harkens back to his behavior and impulsiveness back when he had the flashback of, when he fell in love with Betty and was talking about her with Anna. And that seems to really echo into how he's talking about being with Megan and how he's behaving in this moment. And here we have Betty on the other side of that, looking back, I think, without anger or bitterness about their relationship and what they had. And I think maybe putting it into context that there were good aspects in addition to the many bad ones. And now she's in the new relationship, starting to realize, there are downsides or things that she's not fond of. She feels vulnerable in this moment. And it feels to me like she's trying to get closer to Dawn. But Dawn isn't having any of it. And he pretty quickly shuts it down when he admits to her that he's found someone new.
It's very intimate that Betty admits this to Dawn. Because of all the people in the world, right, she would want to prove to Dawn how her new life is so much better than the life she had with him. So for her to say things aren't perfect seems like a really vulnerable reveal. And they're sharing the glass with the wine in it, this plastic cup. And that's also very intimate. And then Dawn says he's engaged. And I think it is such a great detail to look into Betty's head that she first guesses he's engaged to Bethany. Because that girl, we know, has been on her mind. She could picture them together, and I'm sure she thought about it over and over. I think Betty has probably thought more about Bethany than Dawn ever has.
And in many ways, isn't Megan a version of Bethany? A childcare version of Bethany in so many ways. There's obviously more attraction there between Dawn and Megan than there was between Dawn and Bethany. But man, it feels to me like there's a lot about Bethany that applies to Megan.
And Betty is not as good as Peggy at pretending to be happy for Dawn, but she says the right things and she doesn't fall apart. There's a bit of a tear in her eye, but she's holding it together. She's doing the right thing. And when the doorbell rings because the realtor arrives, Betty hands Dawn the key to the house. And this is very final. We know with the divorce it was final, but this again feels like another goodbye for them. And the final shot, the wine bottle and the plastic cup stay on the kitchen counter, left behind in this empty house. And I feel like the wine bottle represents Dawn's addiction to escaping, and this plastic cup is Betty, this hard, shiny surface without a lot of substance underneath.
Yeah, it does feel like it's the last straw in their relationship, and it's the farewell that they didn't have with the explosive disassembly of things. And now it's been brought to closure here in this moment. Betty's knows that the door has closed behind them, never to be reopened. And here we have Dawn, I think, not looking backwards in the way I think Betty is in this moment, reminiscing. We know he's already looking forward and excited about marrying his secretary.
The final scene is Megan sleeping on Dawn, who's awake. And the closing song is Sonny and Cher's I Got You, Babe, which was released in July of 1965. And you kind of like to think it's an optimistic love song for Dawn and Megan. But if you connect this song to the movie Groundhog Day, where a man lives the same pattern over and over again, the song choice is a little bit darker.
Well, and also Sonny Bono's marriage to Cher was pretty explosive and, ended, after not too long as well. So
On my first watch, I found it really hard to believe that Don was actually going to go through with his marriage to Megan at this point. He doesn't have a great track record with relationships or commitments, and this came out of the blue. It doesn't seem like the worst idea, but it's not very promising.
I'm going to go the opposite on that. I think it is the worst idea. Everybody who's looking at it with a raised eyebrow in the office when they announce it is absolutely right. I would be surprised if this thing works out well.
I guess I have a very low bar for Don because I'm just thinking, okay, maybe it's better than his alcohol addiction and yelling at people who don't deserve it, that kind of thing, which we have also seen from him. But I don't feel good about it either.
He's had two good matches in my mind to this point. Rachel and Faye both seemed like potential life partners. And to see the exit now of Faye, I'm just shaking my head here. It's, you've bumped into a couple of very quality women, Don Draper and you've not made the right choices.
For our listener shoutouts today, we're going to catch up by thanking some of our YouTube subscribers, including Nancy T, High Ranch Buff, Johnny T, Jeremy H, Jeff S, and Susan H. Thank you so much for listening to our show. As we wrap up season 4 of Mad Men, we have a couple of program notes. When we started this podcast, we intended to wrap up each season with a bonus episode discussing listener comments in response to our double dip questions, which you can find on our website, madmenc2z.com. We've collected a few really interesting responses over the first 4 seasons, but they tend to be from the same commenters, and we're hoping for some more viewpoints. So if you get a minute, head on over to madmenc2z.com, click on the episode pages, and give us your thoughts on those double dip questions. We'd like to hear from you. We also wanted to let you know that we're taking a short break this week, and we'll be back the following week with our discussion about the first episode in Mad Men Season 5, A Little Kiss. There's so much more coming up, and we're excited to get to it.
That's it for this episode of All Things Mad Men, from Chip and Dip to Zooby Zoo. Visit our website, madmenc2z.com, to vote for your favorite Sterling lines and to share your opinions on our double dip questions for each episode.
You can find us on Instagram and YouTube at madmenc2z, and please listen, like, and subscribe. That's what the podcast's for.
Thanks for listening, everybody.